Welcome back to the Peak Performance Podcast, and we have former AFL superstar, more than 200-game athlete, Lindsay Thomas. How are you, great man?
How are you, brother? It's good to be here.
Mate, very grateful to have you as a part of our community. We've crossed over a number of times in a number of sort of different circumstances, but before we start any of that, I think we need to sort of address the bugbear in the room. So for those who tuned into our Brodie Smith podcast and saw our little snippet, we were pumping, well, I guess I was pumping your tyres up of what a beautiful man you are. And then he told me this fantastic story about a time you sledged him. Can we just get your side of the story, mate?
Yeah.
Was it deserved? Had you kicked a few on him at that point?
Oh, look, I do remember it. And, I did get sent it to me a couple of times from a few mates. And, no, I do remember it. I think Brodie was only a kid back then. And I was having a really good game. And, as I do in my fashion, I just thought I'd let him know that he might be back in the SANFL next week. So, but it was all tongue in cheek. So, it was good.
I love it, mate. As I mentioned in that podcast, and just want to reiterate, and again, this is not just to pump your tyres up, but you're one of the most wonderful human beings that I've had the pleasure of being able to work alongside, particularly given your accolades, super humble. I love the ability to work alongside you. For those who don't know, I've been working maybe for 4 or 5 years now, in probably an ever-growing capacity with the Jindu Foundation. So thanks to Paulie and Kels particularly for that. We've been able to coach together, which has been amazing. But whenever you speak, people will listen. I think that you hold yourself so well. I think you've got some amazing lessons to teach our next generation as well. And all those kids that get the opportunity to come through and listen to you are super fortunate. And I count myself fortunate to be able to listen to you, mate. So, and then also sort of outside of that, what people don't realise is Lindsay was one of my first one-on-one clients at Peak 1.0 many, many moons ago. I can't even remember how it came about. It sort of feels like a long time ago, but you were dusting the boots off for Portland Footy Club, was it?
We met at Port Magpies.
Yeah, that's it, yeah.
I think you were the trainer back then.
Yes,
and
yep.
Then I retired, and I enjoyed retirement, I think, a little bit too much. And I blew out a little bit, and I remember you were telling me that you were starting up this gym, and it wasn't actually too far from where I was living, and thought I'd flick you a message and try to lose the kegs, and away we are. Look at you now, mate. You're flying.
Again, we couldn't have done it without people like you supporting us along the way, mate. And maybe that's an interesting place to start as opposed to rewinding back. Like, how was your transition out of, a professional environment? Because you were in the system for how many years?
13 years.
13 years.
Yeah.
Did you sort of almost, like, I know we use the term like institutionalised. Did you feel that way? Did you feel like a bit of a lack of purpose or structure when your time was up?
Oh, look, for me, footy was all I ever really knew. Coming from a small community in Port Lincoln, it was all I ever knew. It was in my bloodline. It was in my DNA. To be able to hang around and rub shoulders of the likes of, Peter and Sean Burgoyne and Eddie Betts and Daniel Wells and these kind of guys who were all from back home, and Graham Johncock, it was all I ever wanted to do. And I guess for me, it was the day I looked at footy as being a job is kind of when I knew that my days of playing were kind of done. And I think the last 2 years of my career were probably the most challenging. Being at North Melbourne, contracted, and then basically getting told, you got to retire because of going in a different direction, and then getting traded to Port Adelaide. That was kind of in a space of a month. And I guess coming home was grateful. I was really grateful, but again, I just started looking at it as a job, and I think that's kind of when the penny dropped, where I kind of thought, it's probably time to hang the boots up. And but in saying that, I was very, very lucky and very grateful to be able to play 13 years at the highest level. It's taught me a lot, and it's obviously given me a lot as well. But I kind of was at that point where you get a bit old and you get a bit too slow, and the enjoyment of getting up and looking at it as a job, it's kind of when I knew my time was up.
Now, prior to ever being there, Port Lincoln, I thought it was a small fishing town with nothing in it. But we've been there a few times.
It's beautiful.
God's country, mate.
We were very lucky. Yeah. And shout out to Erin Phillips, who let us stay at her place when she had it sort of on the marina there, which was lovely. All those guys you just mentioned, are
Yeah.
they Port Lincoln boys?
Yeah, so my club that I kind of grew up playing for, the Melly Park Football Club, it's an Indigenous club, obviously back home in Port Lincoln. And like I mentioned before, we probably would have had 12 guys that were on AFL list. And I guess you look at that list, and you look at Sean Burgoyne, 400 games, and you have Peter and Byron Pickett, North medalist, Graham Johncock, and then obviously Eddie Betts, Daniel Wells, like the list goes on.
All of you guys are like aging in reverse. Like, what's in the water out there, mate?
Yeah, I know. I mean, I hear that all the time. But, I mean, like I said, growing up around the footy club, it was the foundation was laid through all of our uncles who, footy was in our DNA. It was all we ever knew, and it was like our Bible, and a young Indigenous kid, you look at Byron Pickett getting drafted and you think, one day that can be me, and then you see Peter Burgoyne and then Sean and these kind of guys, they give you that hope, and then, they come home and, they're just normal people, and you're watching them on TV. But very proud football club. We've had a lot of talent come through the footy club as well, and we haven't had any in a while, so hopefully we can get a few. But I was very lucky as a young kid to be able to come from such a strong footy club, but I think the bloodline within the community was strong as well.
I know you still dust the boots off here and there. Now, I'm in a sort of like a staff member WhatsApp group, and one of my favourite things on a Saturday night is I feel the phone buzz, and I'm usually in bed by 7:30, and it's a picture of Lindsay with ice on both hamstrings and a red wine in hand. Is there any chance you might be heading back to Lincoln to finish the career off and have a few games, mate? What do you reckon?
Yeah, look, I don't know what I'm thinking. Still playing around, but yeah, I think this will be my last year playing. But yeah, I will. I've always said before I stop playing completely, I'll go back home and put the boots on one last time. I haven't been back probably nearly 20 years. So I think it would be really good to kind of start finish where I started. So when that is, I don't know, mate. I can hardly get out of bed these days. So.
When you got drafted, were you playing any footy in the city, or did you go straight from being at Lincoln to?
Yeah. It was a funny story because I was very tiny as a kid. I was very, very small, and we were zoned to Port Adelaide Magpies, and I loved Port Adelaide Magpies. It was all I ever wanted to do was play for Port Magpies. I'd always rush home on a Sunday and watch the ABC because the Sanford games were on back then. And so we had these talent kind of carnivals in Port Lincoln. And I think it was an under-15s carnival. And the late Bobby Clayton was over, who I spent a lot of time with Bobby. And, he was probably one of the massive support for me as a young kid. He said to me, would like you to come and train over in the city. And I'm 15 at the time. And at the time you think, you can come over every now and then. But he actually wanted me to move over. And it was really tricky because, I'm a country boy at heart, and it was really tough to kind of leave home. But like I said, it was all I ever wanted to do. And, so I made the move over when I was 16, and I lived with a host family down in Semaphore, and I got really homesick to a point where I moved back home, and then Bobby actually came and picked me up from Port Lincoln. He came over and said, "Come on, mate, you're coming back," and it was probably the best decision I made, really. So because I was a late bloomer as well. I was really, I was talented, but I wasn't really at that level. I was probably always the last picked, if I'm honest. And look, I came over and I had a really good preseason, and I had a really good year. And then Greg Phillips, Aaron's old man, played me in a reserves trial match, and it kind of stemmed from there. I had a really good year, and got the phone call that I was heading over to Melbourne, and I'd never been to Melbourne before in my life, and got the call on Saturday, and I was on a plane on Monday over to Melbourne. So it happened really quick, and I actually thought I was going to go to Port Adelaide, but that never happened. And I think going to North Melbourne is probably one of the best decisions I've made as well.
What was it like for you if you said you came from a club in Lincoln that had quite a cultural connection for
Yeah.
you and then picking up at the age of 15, 16 and moving over playing somewhere else? How was that part of the homesickness for you?
It was tough, yeah. It was really tricky because you remember the community was so just tight-knit. It was very, uncles, aunties, cousins, nanas, pops. And then you come over to, Adelaide back then I thought was a big city. And then you're kind of competing for a spot because your spot wasn't guaranteed. And, you're training with about 80 kids and you can only fit, 40 into a list. And I was very, very shy. I was very introverted and, I was very unsure as well. And there wasn't too many, Aboriginal kids as well. And, you kind of just hang back and you put your head down and just get to work. And it was really tricky. And I think that's probably the biggest challenge for a lot of our Aboriginal Indigenous kids these days is the homesickness is real, and it's really tough because that pull to go home and be around family, it's really tricky. So it probably took me a year and a half to actually really get settled in, and I think once I got settled in, that's when I felt like I could do this, and I was very fortunate that I had good people like Bobby Clayton and Greg Phillips, and then I had Sean and Peter and Stiffy over here as well. So I was very lucky that I had good support, even though I wanted to be home. I wanted to give playing AFL footy a crack because that was my dream.
Yeah.
And I knew that if that was going to happen, I probably had to just put my head down and get to work.
For sure. Obviously, Jindu's a piece of the puzzle. Sean's touched on
Yeah.
that. But have you seen those pathways change, and what sort of support is there for young Indigenous kids now who have that same goal of
Yeah.
making it in footy?
The Jindu Foundation is amazing. It really is. And Sean and I are very fortunate that we get to work with these kids on a weekly basis. And, these kids are very lucky with these programs because, if these programs were around when I was coming through, I think I wouldn't have had any problems. But I think, the support that these kids have, not just on a sporting level, but in a life in general level, they're very fortunate. They get exposed to be able to work in, facilities like this, and, they get to go over to Melbourne, and then they have amazing guest speakers. They have great role models, Wade Thompson, who played at Port Adelaide, and those kind of guys, and Paulie Vandenberg, who's the founder of Jindu, who's, an ex NBL basketball professional. So they have really good role models, and it's just about guiding these young people. I think the sport is amazing, but it's such a small part of their lives. So as much as we want to get them to that level, I think we just want them to be good people, and I think that's what this foundation's about.
I guess just rewinding a little there, you sort of mentioned that you were shy young fella. As a generalisation, there's sort of a tendency for a lot of young Indigenous kids to sort of be in a similar boat. Is that something, do you think, driven culturally, or is it just because of, I guess, it's such a drastically different environment that they're getting thrown into, or is it a bit of a mixture of all those things from your perspective? And I know I've heard you talk a lot of times to our Jindu kids about, like, use your voices because a lot of them do seem to be quite timid, particularly in the early days.
Yeah. Oh, look, it definitely is a cultural thing. And, that shyness, we call it shame because a lot of these kids are shame. So that means they're obviously very shy and just unclear. And, a lot of these kids, most of the time, if someone says something or they ask them a question, a lot of them will know the answer, but they don't want to say it because they might think it's wrong, or, they might look silly, or whatever the case may be. So we try and encourage them to be leaders and speak out. And I had the same problem when I went over to Melbourne, and it was probably at a point where a lot of people thought I was arrogant because I wouldn't look people in the eye. I wouldn't speak to them. I'd just walk straight past them. And a lot of my teammates early days thought I was really arrogant, not knowing that it was actually a cultural thing for me. And I couldn't really talk in front of team meetings. And, my coach at the time, Danielle Laidley, kind of identified that pretty quickly, and she'd make sure she'd put me in a position where she wouldn't make me talk in front of the group, but she'd always pull me aside and kind of say, this is what we want you to do. This is how we want you to play. Make sure you know your role. So that was probably one of the reasons why I probably came out of my shell quick as well. And, I did get some media training as well, and that kind of helped me a little bit. But I think once I kind of got comfortable and I got a little bit older and I kind of became a leader, I kind of knew, because you don't know when you speak, I've been around a lot of teammates that speak and you just roll your eyes, go, oh, man, he's bloody, talking gibberish. But I think what I learned is when you kind of speak and you know that people are listening, that you make valid points. And I don't like speaking for the sake of it. I always want to make sure that you're speaking to make valid points. But I think you're right. It's definitely a cultural thing, and we try and encourage our young people now to come out of their shells, and we try to put them in positions where one of our mentors, Uncle Joey, has a thing called at Jindu Break the Ice, where we get them in and we tell them about how was the weekend, what did you do, and it just breaks that ice, and we try to get them to come out of their shell as quick as possible.
Amazing. I've been fortunate. I was a very, very spud footballer. Just a peanut who played a little bit of underage. Very grateful that I got to experience just a little tiny taste of that Port Magpies culture.
Yeah.
And I loved it.
Yeah.
Similar to you, a wonderful football club with amazing heritage.
Yeah.
And I guess I sort of was in a time frame where there was a little bit of change there.
Yeah.
But still a lot of undertones of that hard-nosed, discipline and success that they experienced. For me, I feel like that sort of overflowed into many other parts of my life. And maybe if it wasn't for the experience of some of the really tough training that we did there, maybe I might not have been as consistent and dedicated to some of the things I've done at work and to be here today. Talk us through maybe some of those hard pre-seasons that you did, or the early pre-season. Was that a bit of a shock to the system? And can you remember any specific sessions that really got you?
Oh yeah, I it was a big shock to the system when I first went over to Melbourne. I was generally, my first year I was generally pretty fit because I kind of knew early days that I was going to get drafted, so I put a ton of training in, and I was very fortunate that my first year I got to play pretty much straight away, and that was as an 18-year-old kid, your kind of head gets bigger. I'm an NFL player now, and I kind of learned the hard way because I went away and I came back my second year and I come back 9 kilos overweight. And we did a 3K time trial around Princess Park in Melbourne, where Carlton train, and I actually fainted about K and a half in. Adam Simpson, who was the captain at the time, he said, mate, this is unacceptable. You kind of got to. So they banished me for about 6 weeks, where I had to train on my own for 6 weeks, and that's kind of when the penny kind of dropped for me. And 6 o'clock in the morning trainings, and that was really, really tricky and really tough. But I kind of learnt right then and there what it took to be an AFL player. But pre-season, they were always, the first day in particular, many of the boys would say they hate the 2K time trials and all that. But I guess the Utah trips were really tough for us. Over in Salt Lake City, went over about 4 or 5 times in the altitude, and they were really tricky. They were really tough because you just head down, bum up, and get through. And you're away for a month, and by the end of it, everyone wants to kill each other. And then obviously training in the heat. Pre-season just drags on. I definitely don't miss them. But in saying that, I used to love the challenges of them. I used to love coming to work every day, not knowing what we're doing, and then knowing what we're doing, and then kind of in my mind thinking, okay, how am I going to get through this? What am I going to get better at? And what's that going to look like? So I used to love my training, and I always used to put myself around the really good players like your Brent Harveys and kind of shadow them and see how they used to go about it. And I just love the challenges of them. Get through that first week of hell. But I just used to love, not knowing what we're doing, but also just when you get through it, that little accomplishment.
Yeah. When you say you came back a bit overweight, if you don't mind me asking, was there anything in particular? Did you just need a release and stop training, or was there something nutritionally that you just smashed because it was your first opportunity to? Or
Mate, I used to. I was a sucker for the meat and cheese pies.
yeah,
Yeah, and so I reckon I would have had about 100 of those, and Macca's, and you know, it was just a combination of everything. I didn't understand because I thought, I've made it. When I was naturally fit, and I thought it would, I'll be right. I'll get 2-3 weeks under my belt, and all the weight will come off. But at the time, you don't understand that you were putting all this weight on, and back then it was skin folds.
yeah.
So my skin folds were about 100, so they were huge, and it was a combination of everything, just of my diet and obviously not having healthy things, and because it took me probably 2 or 3 years to really, I didn't realise how important food were. Your diet, your sleep, and all those little things. I didn't understand until probably 3 or 4 years in how it was important for your recovery. So I did learn my lesson. I didn't ever come back overweight again. And but yeah, it was I think it was a good lesson to learn early days.
Obviously, it's taboo at the moment, but what are your thoughts on skin folds? And for those who maybe haven't seen it before, it was around when I first got into the industry. I know from an AFL perspective, the goal was to be sort of below 50.
Yeah.
And then usually it would be like the sum of 7 sites, the 7 sites around the body to give a squeeze and put your calibers on. For Sanford, we had below 60.
Yeah.
And again, when you talk about even changing times in the last year, the last 10 years, when I was first at Woodville, we had the fat club. If you were over 60 skin folds, you're in the fat club, and had to do extra sessions on a Saturday. How do you feel about the way that it's gone now? Do you think it's justified in being cut out, or do you think, nah, actually, that's your job? Do you have a opinion on that?
I think times have changed, I reckon.
Yeah.
I think the way the game's evolved, opposed to when I was playing, 10, 15 years ago. I think, back then it was really old school. We didn't have the technology or, the things that they do have now. So, look, I'm a big believer, footballers are professionals, so they should hold themselves in, great condition. And I think the resources that they have now, I think, is way more advanced than obviously than when you and I were playing. But I'm still a bit of an old school. I didn't mind the skin folds. It was a bit of a badge of honour back then. But I'd always get out of Fat Club probably a month before pre-season finished. So
circling back to some of the gym-do stuff, it's been really amazing secondhand to see Sean's journey and getting involved in some conversations that we've had in what he's learnt, maybe some preconceived biases and ideas before really being ingrained in the community. Have you experienced in your professional career any of those biases as a First Nations player?
Yeah, I have. Obviously coming from a small community, you always hear, you're getting special treatment because you're an Aboriginal person, or and even early days, you friends of mine who were probably uneducated, you're only playing at the highest level for Port Magpies because you're an Aboriginal person, and they overshadow the talent and the hard work you actually put in. And even at AFL level, early days, you always hear recruiters talk about Aboriginal players, so much talent, can do this, but do that. But the question mark's always, can they work hard? Do they want to put in the work? So it's always been there, and I think probably over the last couple of years, you can see it kind of shift a little bit, because there's so many great programs now that these young people are exposed to now. There's talent pathways that I think that expose them to get to where they need to get to, but understand the work they have to put in. But yeah, that stereotype was always there, and it's probably always going to be there. I look at it now, and I think about my nephew who's just got drafted to Fremantle, Isaiah Dudley.
How good is he? I love it. That's great. He did a few pre-seasons here with Cosy Pickett. And just
and I'm super proud of that kid because I've known how much work he's put in, and I think for him, his knock was good player, but doesn't really work hard. And he could have went two ways. He could have probably just been happy playing at Centrals and played 100 or 200 games there, or he decided he wanted to put in the work because he knew where he wanted to get to. And to see him to get that opportunity now it just fills my heart with joy because I know how much hard work that boy's put in. So, but it just goes to show if you put in the work, I think you'd be able to accomplish anything really.
So obviously, the amazing programs like Jindu are providing that support for Indigenous kids coming through, and that's amazing in supporting them and their journey. What about the education for everyone else if anyone's listening to this who's a footy coach or works in sport or, like us who are running a business, that educational piece on if you are working with maybe an Indigenous player or person, how do we spread that knowledge in other communities?
Yeah, I always say, especially when you're working with, I guess, let's use Aboriginal athletes, for example, get to know them on a personal level, I think. I think if you can get to know who they are, where they're where they're mobbed from, I think that kind of is an avenue into breaking that ice because straight away that person will think, actually, Sean, he has some genuine interest in who I am as a person. And I think that kind of breaks the ice straight away. And I always encourage having conversation, right? I think that's the biggest thing. I always say the best conversations are the uncomfortable ones because if you don't know, you don't know, right? So I always encourage, I have conversations with my non-Indigenous friends and, talk about maybe some jokes they make that they think's not offensive but is offensive. So I always encourage having those conversations with those people, but I think it's just knowing the person on a personal level. That's the biggest one. I always talk about where they come from, who their family is. We're very family orientated people, Aboriginal people, and we love our family big time. And I think if you can kind of have those conversations and always, if there's a question that you're unsure about, I think just ask it, because I'm sure you'll be able to kind of get the answer you're looking for.
Yeah, I think one of the things that has struck me the most, and again in that theme of transparency, and we've had this discussion before, is potentially I grew up in environments socially and at school and football programs and those sorts of things where maybe people had the ideology that, as you mentioned before, you're getting special treatment because you're an Indigenous person and so on and so forth. And why is there still any debate? Because you've got it so good these days.
Yeah.
And but through my involvement with places like Sonda, Shane Cook, who's a legend, Jindu, and a number of those organisations, I truly have got when I say truly, I think I've got a small insight into generational trauma and what that actually means. Like I'd heard that term before, but didn't really truly understand. But there's been times where we've worked with kids and even adults, for example, who, although maybe obviously they may not have been part of that stolen generation, but they're going home to. You talked about family dynamics at home are different. They live with their grandparents who were impacted by those events. Maybe along the journey to deal with those things. Have had some substance abuse as well, which has led to sort of factors that highly impact the kids of today still, and the dynamic at home. And the other thing for me as well, regardless of somebody's background or Indigenous, non-Indigenous, I just think now as a parent, I've got a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old, and the thought that somebody's going to come and take those away, and try to turn them into something that they think is better than it's just unfathomable. If you're a parent out there trying to put yourself in those shoes is like mind-boggling. So I can't even begin to actually truly think about what it feels like to be in those environments. But I've worked with people enough now to actually say, well, no, there's still so much we need to work through.
Absolutely.
For sure.
Oh, look, it's real. The trauma, generational trauma, it's real, and it does affect our young people still to today. And It's made an impact on my family as well, and I've got 3 young kids as well, and I always have really strong conversations. I have a 15-year-old, 11-year-old, and a 7-year-old, and they're very light-skinned kind of kids, and they've experienced racism as well at school, which is really sad. And but you kind of have those conversations where you talk about stolen generation and what that looked like, and what kind of how the impact it made on our country, and then obviously the referendum was really tough as well, and to kind of talk to a 14 and a 10-year-old at the time about when your daughter asks you, okay, why does Australia don't hate our culture? That's a really tough conversation to kind of have, and but yeah, look, I think we as a country have a long way to go. I think the questions I kind of get asked from a lot of my non-Indigenous friends is, how can you be traumatized when you weren't even around? So they don't really understand what the generational trauma actually means, and it's not your ancestors that were impacted. It actually affects us all still to today. So we still have I think we still have a long way to go, but I think we're getting there. I think having conversation is key, and hopefully, it might not happen in my lifetime, but hopefully we can kind of get there and reconcile.
Yeah. We're getting close to our finishing time, but
Awesome.
one of the things that we do is always tie it back to people's relationship with training. And we've asked you about your pre-seasons and those sorts of things. I guess maybe if we're looking from that cultural perspective, are you seeing relationships with Indigenous kids and exercise changing?
Yeah.
Sort of as you've seen things evolve over the last few decades.
Yeah, I have. Yeah, I think these kids are beasts now, man. They're absolutely beasts. They're
Big shout out to Zachy. Hopefully Zachy's watching.
Zachy,
He's
he'll
built
love
like
that.
a brick shit house.
He'll love that,
and
Zachy.
runs like a machine.
Yeah, he'll love that. But no, I definitely can. I think, like I said, back when I was playing, it was purely talent. But I think now the way the game's played, you can see that these kids are getting exposed to all these programs, and they're just coming in and they're benching 100 kilos straight off the bat. I couldn't bench 100 kilos even when I retired. But no, I'm seeing it. I think these young kids are kind of, they know what to do, and they know the work they need to put in. And we working at Jindu, we still encourage healthy eating and exercising, and because as Aboriginal people, our life expectancy statistically is very different to non-Indigenous people. So we're probably disadvantaged straight away. So, but yeah, it's really good to see that, we are seeing a big change, especially in our community, and, the exercising and the healthy eating and the dieting is, I can see that shift, and it's really positive.
Amazing. Linz, it's been a pleasure to chat to you.
Appreciate you,
honestly, it's one of my most special times of the week when I get to come out on a Wednesday morning and shout at the kids and get them running around and continue to learn from you. As I said, I think that both Indigenous and non-Indigenous people are so fortunate to be able to listen and learn from somebody like yourself who's lived such an amazing life. I'm excited to continue to learn from you and look forward to seeing you pull on the boots with Port Lincoln just one more time. Great man, but really appreciate it and can't wait for people to hear this.
Nah, I appreciate you guys. Thanks for having me.
So there you have it, our chat with the very modest Lindsay Thomas. And there are so many takeaways from that episode. I think the overarching theme, though, are those special considerations and a deeper level of understanding when working with First Nations athletes. Take the time to have conversations and really get to know the people you're working with.